Joining me now is Steve Bannon. He's a producer for the Rachel Maddow Show. He's the producer of the Maddow blog. He's an MSNBC political contributor. And most importantly today, he is the author of the brand new and important book, Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past. We're going to be talking extensively about this in just a few moments. But obviously, Steve, you're here, so I want to talk politics with you. The new stuff that we got this morning from New York Times and Siena College shows that Harris may actually have a chance in North Carolina. Tell me about what that does to the race.
Well, it opens up a lot of paths. I mean, right now, as you noted earlier in the A block, right, we were looking at this race and thinking all of this is going to come down to Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And now we know better. As these polls indicate, there are a series of paths that are opening up that should make Republicans awfully nervous. North Carolina is a state that Trump wasn't concerned about, especially when Biden was in the race. And now all of a sudden, Harris not only is competitive in the state, she might actually have a lead in the state. That's 13 electoral votes that can very easily change the nature of the entire contest.
I want to talk to you about the speech that Donald Trump made, the press conference. We don't know what to call these things anymore. And that thing where he started talking about birds. Every one of these things, something different happens. It was sharks and batteries, and it's birds, and he talks about toilet flushing and water stuff. I wonder whether this is something else, whether he doesn't have the ability to stick to a script on policy. His team would really like him to be focused on policy, not on Kamala Harris. But every time he's not talking about Kamala Harris or gender or race, he goes to this nonsense.
Yeah, in a rather literal sense, he can't help himself. I mean, it's not just his campaign staff. Republicans on Capitol Hill and the states, they're all begging and pleading with him, stay on message, understand exactly what you want to say, stick to your script and deliver the message. In fact, he can't help himself. We saw that in the Republican convention. He had a script. We all received it. And then he blew past it, gave a speech that was 3 times as long as it was supposed to be. It was filled with lies, filled with meandering nonsense, completely a missed opportunity for him to set the stage for the upcoming months. And yet here we have one event after another. We saw this event in Montana. We saw the event at Mar-a-Lago. We saw the event at Bedminster, in which he's just simply internally incapable of delivering a coherent message. And yet he doesn't seem to realize that it's costing him the race.
I want to ask you about Virginia. That came up as well. There was this talk of New Hampshire and Virginia. Is that really in play as far as you can tell? They've been trying to say that it's in play so that this map gets bigger. Is it?
Well, shortly before Biden dropped out of the race, there was a lot of polling data to suggest that state was slipping right out of Democrats' hands. I think after the incumbent president has stepped aside, it has changed the nature of the race, not only nationally, but specifically in Virginia. At this point, I think that Republicans are not yet investing any real time and energy in Virginia because they realize it's probably out of reach. Although with 80 days remaining, we all have to wait and see. But for right now, I think it's looking awfully blue.
Obviously, we're going into the Democratic National Convention this coming week, so the news cycle will once again now for a fourth week straight be on Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They seem to be using that well. A lot of rallies, a lot of energy. What does Trump have to do? He's not getting out there a lot. Is he just ceding that ground for a while because the news cycle's there, or is it because they don't have a message that's working?
Well, maybe a little bit of both. I think that Donald Trump has not yet hit the trail in any meaningful way because I think combination of things. I think he's partially lazy. I think he's partially coming from the perspective of he's assuming that things will work out for him. And I think he's looking at polling that only tells him what he wants to hear and discarding all else. But at the same time, one would like to think that reality would sink in. One would like to think that he would have at least somebody around him who has his ear, who could say, Mr. Former President, things aren't going your way. The Democratic Convention hasn't even started yet, so that bump that Democrats are likely to get in the coming weeks hasn't even begun yet. And so either he gets on his running shoes or he falls further behind.
Steve, stand by, because I want to continue this conversation after the break. When you have leaders who so openly and willingly lie, the truth at some point ceases to exist to their followers. In his new important book, Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past, MSNBC's own Steve Bannon investigates the GOP's attempts to rewrite the stories of the last few years and the dangerous consequences that are unfolding as a result. Bannon writes, quote, efforts to rewrite history have become a scourge on the polity. They have a fundamentally transgressive effect on the public discourse. They are intended to leave the public misinformed, confused, and disoriented about the critically important events of their civil society. But just as important are the practical implications. These are dangerous authoritarian tactics that contribute to the weakening of democracy. Back with me now is Steve Bannon, producer for The Rachel Maddow Show and the important brand new book, Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past. Steve, good to have you back here again. There's a lot of important theses in your book, but this one really stood out to me because it warns that if you accept these lies, if they become part of your reality, as in 1984, to which you allude in your book's title, you actually wreck politics.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think that the foundation of our democracy is shared knowledge about recent events and current events. And once that foundation is corrupted by partisans with an agenda, it becomes disorienting. People do not necessarily know who to believe, what to believe, how to believe. And so they're doing this on purpose in a way that destabilizes democracy and makes the political system itself unable to function because people don't necessarily they're not in a position to separate fact from fiction.
I want to read from page 61 of your book, in which you say, in the Republicans' war on the recent past, there was nothing mysterious about the motivation behind the party's propaganda campaign against the 2020 election. Trump, unwilling to accept the fact that the American electorate had rejected him by a margin of more than 7 million popular votes and 74 electoral votes, concocted a dangerous tale about voter fraud he couldn't prove, schemers he couldn't identify, and corruption he couldn't find. In early June 2020, the incumbent said about a possible defeat, certainly if I don't win, I don't win. He added that if he ultimately came up short, you go on and do other things. Trump didn't mean a word of it. He spent the months leading up to Election Day 2020 preparing to reject the legitimacy of a possible loss. He spent the aftermath of the election lying about and trying to reverse the outcome. And he'd spent the ensuing months and years pretending that he'd secretly won the race that forced him from the White House. The important part about that passage to me, Steve, is that anybody can lie. Lying's free. But when you set the groundwork for the lie, as Trump did before the last election, somehow the lie, the big lie, became more palatable to some people. And that's actually happening now.
It is, right. So we have ample public polling data to suggest that the vast majority of Republicans look back at the 2020 race and are convinced by the lie. They have fallen for the scam. They believe that Trump won, Biden lost, fair and square, and we're having an illegitimate precedent in the White House right now. And now we're seeing the same thing happening again. Trump and his party and his allies in conservative media and elsewhere are continuing to lay the groundwork that he has to win in 2024, or they'll just simply start this process anew. And it is destabilizing, and it is corrupting, and it is inherently at odds with the way democracy is supposed to work.
It's 192 pages. It's an easy read. The chapters are set up in a way that allows you to read them, 7 chapters and an epilogue. It doesn't have to be linear. Other than giving this book to someone who believes some of this stuff, what is the solve for this problem of the lying that has permeated and possibly is eating away at our democracy?
Ali, I think there are 3 things to keep in mind here. I think the first is the fact that we have to have a society that values truth, and we all have a role to play on that because the truth can't speak for itself. It needs champions. And so all of us, all citizens of the United States, have a role to play in promoting the truth. I think the second thing to keep in mind is that, Ali, you and I are in the media business, and I think those of us who work as media professionals and in journalistic institutions across the country have to help separate fact from fiction for the public because they rely on us so heavily to do so. The third thing I want to emphasize is that, Ali, if you and I went to see a magic show and we saw a magician pull off an illusion, we'd be amazed.
Right.
But after the show, if we learned how that trick was done, we'd no longer be amazed. It would lose its potency. And I think that there's a parallel here as it relates to Republican efforts to rewrite recent history, because ultimately, once we expose the scam, we go a long way towards defeating the scam. If we know how and why they're rewriting history and making reality up for grabs, if we know how and why, then all of a sudden the scam starts to fall apart. It goes a long way towards ending the war on the recent past, which is why I wrote the book in the first.
Steve, I know when you write a book, you got to spend a lot of time doing a lot of TV shows, but I want to remind our viewers, you show up on this show even when you don't have a book all the time. You're a great friend to our show and to me, and we're all smarter for having you around.